Yeah, get the fuck out of here. There's lots of poverty in America. 3 out of 20 Americans are poor. It's 1.5 out of 10, 15% of us. So that's 45 million Americans disagree. You got 500,000 homeless disagree. 1 out of 3 kids in Castillo County disagree. Castillo County, Alamosa County, Conejos County, Pueblo City, lots of poor people. Poor people all over the place. We need some running water in this cold-ass desert valleys of southern Colorado. On the side of Venezuela, you got St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, India, South Africa, Cuba, China, Russia, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Jamaica, Mexico, Uruguay. So during the 2016 election,
he's like, "Oh yeah, no problem." Like he really meant it. It's like no problem.
I
I
like
eat
how you said
mac
that
salad
in
every
a
day.
Hawaiian accent too.
As a staple, right?
Wow.
So the same point man who had already previously coup d'etat or tried to coup d'etat Venezuela for 2 days but failed, Elliot Abrams is the point man for Donald in order to go into Venezuela. Elliot Abrams, the same piece of shit.
Just last year,
he's Reagan's Secretary of Dirty Wars. He's responsible for Jacqueline and Felix's ancestors being killed. Their cousins and their... So Jacqueline and Felix, the 2 kids that were killed at the border, Elliot Abrams had done death squads in Guatemala, El Salvador.
Republican opponent stated that, quote, "A vote for Tulsi is a vote for the devil."
So Hannibal Lecter has killed less than Elliot Abrams. Jeffrey Dahmer has killed less than Elliot Abrams. We're going to listen to Elliot Abrams. He says to the media, "Hello, I'm back." This is his second coup d'etat attempt in Venezuela. Elliot Abrams.
Because of my Hindu faith. The message in each of these situations was simple. You will be punished politically for being of the wrong religion. There's nothing more un-American than this.
In 2015, Barack Obama had sanctioned Venezuela, like 7 oligarchs were sanctioned, and the sanctions have worsened it. Donald, he had some sanctions. Today's sanctions are right out extortion and robbery. Congress should press charges against this government for high crimes and misdemeanors.
That may not be something that you're taught.
But
that really
to
does.
all of us
right.
as taxpayers is that you're going to have less healthcare costs.
If you're preventing people from getting sick, then you are lowering the cost of highly escalating healthcare.
Right. And we're also looking out for each other. Because there's information that we're distributing. Listen, you want to have your loved ones live longer and be healthier and not
improving
be
quality
incapacitated.
Of life. My gosh. You know.
So there's always some sort of Wall Street connection, right? You got all the big oil corporations, but you also got Goldman Sachs and BlackRock. Goldman Sachs, which, about crashed the economy. They said there's a rally in defaulted Venezuelan bonds sparked by hopes of regime change, handed some juicy early year gains for Venezuela's biggest creditors.
They asked me, why is the United States and its allies supporting these terrorist groups who are destroying Syria when it was Al-Qaeda who attacked the United States on 9/11, not Syria?
Goldman Sachs, T. Rowe Price, Stone Harbor, and BlackRock. Venezuela has defaulted on almost all its debt since November 2017. The chances of Maduro leaving have now ramped up, in which case the potential for the country to rebound economically and for oil production to come back is going to be much higher. Aberdeen Standard Investments holds Venezuela's debt. The recovery rates on the defaulted bonds are set to be very large.
So Tulsi Gabbard has announced that she's running for president in 2020. Most of you probably know Tulsi Gabbard already, and it's likely because...
Oh, man. War is good business. All these finance fucking dickheads. So you got Tulsi Gabbard, an actual fucking warrior, who's sitting there saying, nah, this shit isn't going... And then you got all these, fucking corporate fucking goddamn dickholes.
No, just the time that you'll get with your family and with your kids and being mobile and getting out and around. And so using the example of these people in Waimanalo, that's what they've seen with the folks that they've been able to help is about education and like, here's how you could eat in a healthy way that's good for you.
You got these elitist snobs that sit in a cubicle and sit there and make all these, the crunch numbers. Venezuela government bonds jumped 23 cents on the dollar to 33 cents. The PDVSA bonds jumped from 14 cents on the dollar to 24 cents. Why is everybody rushing in to buy Venezuela's debt? That's almost like, that sounds nice, right? Venezuela's had this debt a long time. If we weren't putting economic sanctions and trying to sabotage their economy, maybe we could have, saved Venezuela on its own instead of toppling the regime. So toppling the regime, Wall Street is banking on regime change. Wall Street is banking on the United States government invading Venezuela. And then everything's just going to go back to normal. Everything's just going to turn out fine. And then Goldman Sachs will be able to make their money in T. Rowe Price and Stone Harbor and BlackRock.
She stood up to the DNC, and so many people on the left, have a very favorable opinion of her because she's one of very few people on the left who.
So Wall Street is banking on regime change. 5,000 troops have been floated out to Colombia, and Colombia will just take our shit, right? Canada, Haiti, all these nations, Argentina, Brazil. Anytime we want to park our military in Brazil, that stupid-ass fascist will allow it. He ain't going to stop us. He'll probably be like, oh, my God.
Thought macaroni salad was
right.
salad.
So that's what I'm talking about. The basic level of just like, eating fresh foods and, cutting out sugar and, minimizing fried foods, like those kinds of things. We can't take for granted that everybody just knows this,
right? Especially
when you're brought up in a certain way or a certain kind of culture or whatever.
But Colombia is what John Bolton had written on his little legal pad. So Donald actually told the Colombia mafia and government to go ahead and kill Maduro. So the order's already been put out. The kill order has already been put out. When they say all options are on the table, so all options are on the table. So we're going to go ahead and release smallpox on the Venezuelan people, right? Just chemical, biological warfare, just, scorched earth campaign.
Stood up to the DNC, and that's definitely taking a risk in a way that shows that perhaps she's not a politician who's only all about her career, that
Venezuela, they've actually captured Juan Guaido. And so, or not captured, they're banning him from leaving. They're banning him from leaving, and they are freezing his accounts, which they should. So Donald's, basically caused a civil war here in America. Now there's going to be a world war over this stupid shit.
Love for all people, and making sure that every American, regardless of sexual orientation, is treated equally under the law.
So Maduro has had many assassination attempts, one by drone strike. That's a little fishy. Just a couple months ago, August 2018, a drone strike. So
it's a little deeper than that for somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. Now, the other reason why I might know her is because she was a very early supporter of Bernie Sanders.
So is that from Miami? Is that from Bogota, Colombia? Venezuela is investigating Juan Guaido for the violent acts of January 23rd. A red-level travel ban has been issued for American travelers. You can't go to Venezuela unless, you're brave. State Department has evacuated most of their employees.
People that don't want it to become a part of the competition.
Yeah.
They just don't want to compete with it, with whatever they're profiting from, whether it's the people that are selling pain pills or the people that are using it for, it was initially made illegal because of paper.
Yeah,
William
exactly.
Randolph Hearst got involved in it because he had paper mills.
Right.
And, he also owned newspapers, so he started demonizing it to get people to think that if we made hemp legal, we were going to have people running around on the marijuana, killing people and jumping out of windows.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The 1999 Venezuela Constitution says that the president of Venezuela can only be removed by the power of recall. You cannot impeach the president. The National Assembly has no authority to get rid of the president. Venezuela has the power of recall and referendum, as does Colorado. Shit, if a democracy doesn't have referendum initiative and recall, it's not a real democracy.
The United States has a disastrous history of military intervention and regime change around the world, which has brought suffering to millions of people. It's bankrupted our country, dishonored our troops, and it's undermined our national security. We must end this policy now before we get into yet another military conflict, this time in Venezuela. Now, President Trump and his administration have already...
And the internal struggle between the Constituent Assembly and the National Assembly is the exact same struggle that happened in these good old United States of America. 1787 Constitutional Convention dissolved the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation. I'm sure the Continental Congress didn't like that, but they accepted it. George Washington's the first president, even though America had already been born 13 years prior. Who was running America before George Washington? And how come you don't know that, America?
I look forward to being able to share more of my story and my experiences growing up, not as an excuse, but in the hopes that it may inspire others to truly live aloha.
The Communist Party of India criticized foreign intervention and called on the peoples of the world to show solidarity with the Venezuelan people. The French Communist Party and social organizations such as the Paris Bolivarian Circle and the ALPA TCP Collective in France, the Paraguayan GASU Front, the German Left Party, also expressed their continued support to the Venezuelan people. Telesur reported that Russia President Vladimir Putin called Maduro to express his continued support and emphasize that destructive external interference is a gross violation of the fundamental norms of international law.
We have, I'm working with a Republican from Florida named Carlos Curbelo. We just introduced a bill to essentially commission a study by the National Academy of Science made up of objective reports and other studies that have been done from states that have already legalized to one extent or another marijuana, to compile an independent fact-based report for the federal government on what has come about in those states in every respect, whether you're talking about healthcare, economy, or criminal justice and law enforcement, like every single thing. Look at this in a very diverse way.
The government of Nicaragua said the great homeland does not submit. It stands proud with the love of its nation, united in Alba. We are all Venezuela. Latin America and the Caribbean, the cradle of great and luminous beings, demands dignity and greatness against the empire. China supports the efforts made by the Venezuelan government to uphold national sovereignty, independence, and stability. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Xua Chunying said during a press conference, "We always follow the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. We oppose foreign interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela, and we hope that the international community will also follow this principle."
Instituted heavy sanctions on Venezuela. They've doubled down on their position that all options are on the table. I wholeheartedly support the Venezuelan people as they fight for a free and fair democracy. But the United States should not be in the business of intervening, of picking who should lead their country, and we certainly should not be threatening military action. Venezuela poses no threat to the United States. Congress has not authorized the United States to...
On the side of Venezuela, you got St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, India, South Africa, Cuba, China, Russia, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Jamaica, Mexico, Uruguay. So during the 2016 election, I essentially boiled down my demands from the president for three things. I wanted less war, I wanted something to be done about poverty, and I wanted marijuana to be legal. So none of those things have happened. We got more war than ever. Marijuana is still illegal on the federal level, even though you got, 10, 11, 13 fucking states that it's legalized. So the feds ain't shit, right? The state says, fuck your laws, federal government.
I didn't have an answer for them.
Obviously, the United States government denies providing any sort of help to the terrorist groups that you're talking about. They say they provide help for the rebel groups. Tell us more
about... The reality
about...
is, Jake, the reality is, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because this is an often talked about thing by people like Adam Kinzinger and others saying, well, we've got to support the moderate rebels. Every place that I went, every person that I spoke to, I asked this question to them. And without hesitation, they said, there are no moderate rebels. Who are these moderate rebels that people keep speaking of? Regardless of the name of these groups, the strongest fighting force on the ground in Syria is al-Nusra or al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is a fact. There's a number of different other groups. All of them essentially are fighting alongside, with, or under the command of the strongest group on the ground that's trying to overthrow Assad. The Syrian people recognize, and they know, that if President Assad is overthrown, then al-Qaeda or a group like al-Qaeda that has been killing Christians, killing people simply because of their religion or because they won't support their terror activities, they will take charge of all of Syria.
And we haven't had a major war on poverty. In fact, the Trump administration says that poverty is already, you know what, we've already declared victory over poverty in America. We're going to go into Venezuela because of all their poverty. And here, you know, there's no poverty in America. Yeah, get the fuck out of here. There's lots of poverty in America. 3 out of 20 Americans are poor. It's 1.5 out of 10, 15% of us. So that's 45 million Americans disagree. You got 500,000 homeless disagree. 1 out of 3 kids in Castillo County disagree. Castillo County, Alamosa County, Conejos County, Pueblo City, lots of poor people. Poor people all over the place. We need some running water in this cold-ass desert valleys of southern Colorado.
Go to war in Venezuela. And there's no justification for our country to violate the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people. Now, the reality is that threats of U.S. military action and regime change in Venezuela is undermining ongoing efforts to convince North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons program, which exists because...
So, nothing has happened that I wanted to, right? The 3 main things I wanted 2 years ago, we're not even getting close to those. So, Donald Trump, he's not a relatable person. He's not relatable. He sits there and complains, well, you know, he just got $1 million loan from his father. That's all he ever got. You know, his father never give him a break, just $1 million loan. Jesus Christ. If I had $1 million loan, it'd be easy as shit. Not $1 million gift, though. Poor Donald, right? He didn't get a gift, just a loan. Donald Trump also thinks we need an ID to buy Cheerios. Obama knew what Cheerios was. Obama liked Dijon mustard, so he was a little stuck up, a little snobby. But he's still not as out of touch as Donald is. I remember when Paris Hilton, somebody mentioned Walmart to Paris Hilton. She never heard of Walmart. She said, what does Walmart sell? A bunch of wall stuff? A bunch of wall stuff.
Who have no business being there.
Yeah, those are really important points. And I'm glad you brought that up. I've heard argument that the wiretapping and that this surveillance program is necessary to prevent terrorist activity. Does that make any sense to you?
It is the most often used argument.
No, it's named after Samuel Walton, and it sells every fucking thing. Jesus Christ, how do you not know what Walmart is? How do you live in America and not know what Walmart is? How do you live in America and not know that you can buy cereal and groceries without an ID? That's because Donald Trump has never shopped for his own groceries before. And I'm not sure if I can trust a person who's never bought their own groceries. Everybody I know buys their own groceries. I've never heard of anybody who's got valets, wage slaves, and all this fucking bull to buy the store-bought goods for them. You can't even go buy your own damn groceries. You can't buy your own gallon of milk and your own loaf of bread.
Kim Jong-un sees it as the only deterrent against U.S.-led regime change. Now, President Trump is promising North Korea we will not wage regime change war against them, but at the same time is simultaneously threatening regime change in Venezuela. North Korea is going to look at President Trump's actions, not at empty promises. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela and let the Venezuelan people determine their own future.
So there's just a shift of 100,000 votes in 3 states, so Donald Trump barely lost. He won because of the Electoral College and because of Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So 3 states. Really, that's the reason why Donald Trump won. If you don't live in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin, your votes don't really matter. It's only those swing states that matter. So if you just shifted 100,000 votes in those 3 states, Donald Trump loses. Donald Trump barely won, so he won, right? Our laws have these stupid-ass electoral college in it. But both Donald and Hillary, their unfavorables were both 60%, which means that most Americans hated both candidates. They hated both Hillary and Donald. Nobody was voting for their candidate. They were voting against the other person.
Facebook and Twitter and Google are a perfect example where you have people asking questions and it becomes very obvious quickly.
Yes.
They don't know how to log into Facebook.
Right.
They've never sent a tweet in their lives. Some of these people are very proud that they either don't have a cell phone or they still have a flip phone, which is fine if that's your personal decision.
So it's not inevitable. I think he's actually a very weak president. He hasn't been a good bipartisan person. He hasn't brought this country together. He could have got us universal health care. He wanted universal health care. There's something else. He was also against the war on drugs. So, he was for a wealth tax. He wanted to tax the top 15% or some shit. So Donald Trump used to be badass as fuck until he became president. Then he just sucked. So I want to go into just a little bit of a timeline to understand what's going on. So Juan Guaido is going to get all these millions of dollars, but then he goes back to Venezuela to give a speech, and now he can't leave Venezuela. So the United States actually seemed like the government had the upper hand because they went ahead and stole $7 billion, and they went ahead and put all these economic sanctions. They stole Citgo refineries. So they're stealing Venezuela stuff, right? That's some hardcore sanctions. It's a borderline declaration of war right there. Going to steal somebody's $7 billion. You didn't just steal their watch. You didn't just steal a laptop. You stole $7 billion. And it was, their oil company. So the oil company, the Bank of England, stole over $1 billion worth of gold, and then they're saying that nobody can buy Venezuelan gold right now. Venezuelan gold, that would be cheap. We are fucking this market up. They're banking on us intervening and then fixing everything because we fixed, Syria, we fixed Iraq, we fixed Libya, Afghanistan. 70% of Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban, but it's fixed. We won. Remember the Battle of Iraq and our allies? We are won. We declared victory. Mission accomplished.
And again, I think that you get a lot of brownie points on the left if that's the stance that you took, because let's face it, even senators like Elizabeth Warren did not hop on the Bernie train early on, and in fact, she didn't hop on the Bernie train at all. When we all know ideologically she aligns much more with Bernie Sanders than with Hillary Clinton. And remember, Bernie lost Massachusetts, I think it was by like 1 point or something crazy.
So there's been several times we tried to overthrow Venezuela. We had U.S. Operation Constitution. That was where we were trying to get the military to go ahead and get some sort of military junta to overthrow their own government. Then we had U.S. Operation Armageddon. So that shows us where we don't give a fuck, right? Operation Armageddon, Operation End of the World. Go ahead, Operation End of the World's a go. And they want to assassinate Maduro at a military parade, July 2017. Some drones bombs try to kill Maduro. So drones up in the sky, that seems very much like something the U.S. would do. He went in and threw a bunch of local folks into it. That was 2018. Juan Guaido was trained by the same people who did the color revolutions, exporter revolutions. So he's a Chicago boy. They believe in shock doctrine. Imperialism is capitalism's natural extension. Once you've exploited your own country and there's nothing left to exploit, you got to start exploiting new countries. So U.S. Operation Armageddon, U.S. Operation Constitution, the sanctions. We've been fucking with Venezuela since 2002. We kidnapped their president for 2 days.
So the argument has been made that perhaps if Elizabeth Warren did jump in, that Bernie could have won Massachusetts, and that could have changed the race moving forward. So I don't want to pick too much on Elizabeth Warren in this segment. This segment is about Tulsi Gabbard, but the fact that Tulsi Gabbard...
So Venezuela has to use the dollar when they sell oil to us. But they've largely gotten off the petrodollar because they're dealing with China and Russia now. The petrodollar would be useful for U.S. sales, but there's a blockade of Venezuela oil now, unless it's from private companies who somehow isn't associated with the Venezuelan government. Now, this is just crystal clear. We've been doing this shit for 100 years. 1953, coup d'etat in Iran. So the United States government coup d'etat Iran. And why? Because they nationalized their oil fields. They took the oil for their country and for their citizens, and the United States could not handle that. How fucking dare you? Same shit with Venezuela. The U.S. government is currently in a cold war with Venezuela. A cold war can easily turn into a hot war. And with the world divided, this could easily turn into a world war. We're playing with fire. And maybe because the American people, we've been protected by these two oceans. We've been at war for 20 years, so we don't see the effects of our bombs and our attacks. But I guarantee you, the people of Yemen know what's going on. The people of Myanmar know what's going on. And the people of Venezuela know what's going on. So the U.S. has already been divided. We're going to divide the entire world, right? So it's a cold war right now because there's no firepower, there's no bombings, there's no invasion, no ground troops. The U.S. government has stolen $7 billion of Venezuela's property January 28, 2019, but that was just recently, and that's the stuff that's already on American soil. So I'm for what's best for the American people and the Venezuelan people. The government, oligarchs be damned. The Americans are not being threatened. We're not being threatened right now by Venezuela. We're being conditionally threatened. If we invade Venezuela, then these countries that have sided with Venezuela says that shit might happen. So if we drop bombs in Caracas, and then China, Russia, and India, they might start bombing us. This gives them a great humanitarian mission. You think they would avoid that? That gives them an opportunity to fuck with the empire that's been fucking with them for such a long time. Just like in Vietnam, so at the very least, let's assume that China and Russia and the Indians and South Africa and Uruguay and Bolivia and Jamaica, let's assume none of those countries stop us from invading Venezuela, in our Monroe Doctrine sphere, in our so-called backyard. What they would do is they would arm the Venezuelan people to the teeth. They would give the Venezuelan people all the weapons that they need, and they would allow the Venezuelan people to fight it out for decades, just like in Vietnam, just like in Syria, just like we did to the Russians when the Russians illegally invaded and occupied Afghanistan in the 1980s. We're in a cold war with Venezuela. Currently, they've stolen $7 billion. $7 billion, that's nothing to sniff at. And this could easily turn into a world war. And they're being very clear about why they picked this Juan Guaido. He's into shock doctrine. He's into Chicago boys. He's into the capitalist way that America says, or the American government says. So they're against any kind of the social programs. Cut all the social programs out and export the shit out of their raw materials. Let the American corporations rape the shit out of Venezuela, and then somehow that's going to be to their advantage. John Bolton is the National Security Advisor. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. So between those two assholes and then Donald, Dictator Don, who keeps on writing out executive orders, so he just writes out executive orders. Nobody's voted for this war. Nobody's going to vote for the war. Congress wasn't even asked. But even if they were asked, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, they all jump in for war. That's all they give a shit about is war, war, war. So a lot of this began January 22nd. There was some protest. Juan Guaido is giving protest, but Mike Pence had called Juan Guaido, and he said that if he was to declare himself the president, then Donald would back him. So Juan Guaido gave a speech, and a lot of, those protests, a bunch of violence had happened January 22nd, January 23rd. So January 23rd is violent protests. This is going to be the big ones. But on January 22nd, less than 1 out of 5 Venezuelans even knew who Juan Guaido was. So how is this guy, who less than 20% of the Venezuelan people even know, going to say he's the leader of the country? This is a far right-wing politician, far right-wing fascist. He's been in the violent gangs. He's a Chicago boy. He wants to make Venezuela's economy scream. He's a political bottom dweller, a mid-level politician, until after Mike Pence and Donald Trump got involved. So Donald has just doomed his presidency even further. Tulsi Gabbard is striking this iron while it's hot. Where the hell's Bernie? Is he going to wait until 2020 before he announces? What the fuck is he doing? Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. Juan Guaido is more popular outside Venezuela than inside Venezuela. He's a radical right-wing violent opposer. He's a hater. His party is badly discredited. He only has about 20% support compared to 30% support for Maduro. So had the damn presidential elections. Maduro has greater support, according to the polls. They're calling it the Troika of tyranny, and I guess that's like the axis of evil. And I guess Troika because it's Russian influence, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. I don't know who the Troika of tyranny is. Oh no, it's the Troika of tyranny. Watch out for Cuba. Jesus Christ, y'all been talking about Cuba for about 50 fucking years now. That little tiny island, you're afraid of that little tiny island, huh? Because they got some radical ideas. They got some radical thinkers in Cuba. So January 24th, 2019 is when Donald's going to tweet, "We're at war with Venezuela." January 23rd, 2019 is when the violent protest had rocked Venezuela under the undersecretary at the UN said that this is what started it. So you had violent protests January 23rd, and then Donald says, "I'll save Venezuela," and while he was on the shooter, he tweeted that he was going to coup d'etat and overthrow the government. So Guaido announces himself the president, then Juan Guaido leaves, and he goes on this anti-Maduro rock star campaign, and, you know, like I said before, the world, he's more popular around the world than he is in Venezuela, in his own country. But after about 4 or 5 days, he's going to go back, which I think was tactically a bad idea for, you know, the U.S. government and for Juan Guaido. January 28, 2019, the Russians apparently sent a Boeing 777 to Venezuela to pick up $180 million worth of gold, a.k.a. 20 tons of gold. The airline company is Nordwind Airlines. It doesn't have any regular flights to Caracas, so that's Venezuela's capital city. So something is up, something is going on here. The Nordwind Boeing 777 flew straight from Moscow to Caracas. So they're looking to do something with their gold. They're going to sell it to the United Arab Emirates. And then Marco Rubio, how the fuck is Marco Rubio getting in these discussions? Marco Rubio, he tweeted, right, because these badass warrior they like tweeting, right? Oh, man, keyboard warriors. So Marco Rubio is a keyboard warrior. Donald Trump is a keyboard warrior, tweeting this, tweeting that. I wonder if, you know, fucking little Marco Rubio had said that the United Arab Emirates, if they bought gold, or anybody else in the world, if you buy gold from Venezuela, then we'll put economic sanctions on you too, right? Sitting there telling to the United Arab Emirates, like one of the richest countries in the world. They got the tallest building in the world. January 29th, 2019, Maduro froze Juan Guaido's assets. So the United States government stole $7 billion away from the Venezuelan people, the three sicko oil refineries, and frozen all the bank accounts and gold. The Bank of England took $1.2 billion worth of gold. So that's some bullshit, right? You set up shop in another country and then they just take all your shit without any compensation. You're just going to steal the shit, huh? So, I mean, that can't make you feel good if you're Russia, right? Russia owns a steel plant in Pueblo City. Well, if we get into it, you know, that means Russia's going to lose their steel plant. The American people couldn't take the steel for themselves. So the idea was for the United States government to take $7 billion, to take all these bank accounts, to take all this gold, and then give it to Juan Guaido. So Juan Guaido would have all this gold, and he who has the gold makes the rules, right? So that hasn't happened. That's what they were trying to do. and I don't know if he got some money, but Maduro has frozen Guaido's assets. This is January 29, 2019, and banned Guaido from leaving the country. So he hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been, beat up or shot. Juan Guaido isn't on house arrest. He's allowed to move about in Venezuela, but he's under country arrest. He can't leave the country. His assets, his money is being frozen, and he can't fly away. So if Juan Guaido is the president, how come he can't leave his own country, right? The president of the universe can't even fly in an airplane or cash a check in his own country. So Juan Guaido is being criticized for not being in Venezuela because he's a superstar on this world tour just a few days ago. The United States eminent domain, the property, cash, and gold of Venezuela, $7 billion worth 3 Citgo oil refineries along the Gulf of Mexico. So the U.S. government robbed Maduro's property in order to give Juan Guaido all those resources. Juan Guaido shouldn't have chanced going back to Venezuela if the U.S. government wanted victory. But now Venezuela seems to have the upper hand because the U.S. government doesn't have their puppet anymore. What happened to your puppet? U.S. government, your puppet is gone. The U.S. government's threatening military force, sending 5,000 troops to Colombia. All options are on the table, so smallpox and, putting measles and cholera and dropping nukes. Who gives a shit, right? 75,000 nukes on Venezuela. Juan Guaido is fanning the flames of armed rebellion, trying to get the loyal military of Maduro's to deflect. So that's treasonous, isn't it, to overthrow the government? Venezuela is investigating Juan Guaido's involvement in the violent protests, especially on January 23rd, the day before Trump's coup d'etat tweet.